MKE600 is a shotgun microphone ideal for professional video camera applications. Maximal rejection of ambient side noises thanks to pronounced directivity. And because the MKE600 has a very good suppression of structure-borne noise, it makes one of the most versatile all-round shotgun microphones on the market.
Your sadness in this bowl till you feel minor changes in your body.
XS Wireless Digital is the perfect wireless audio solution for content creators and filmmakers. Thanks to a 2.4 GHz transmission, XS Wireless Digital is a truly plug-and-play system that allows you to upgrade your in-camera audio with one-button operation. With a variety of configurations to choose from, this entry point into the world of wireless will improve your workflow and will expand the possibilities of how you capture audio for your video. For more information, visit sennheiser.com/xswd.
This stream is powered by Wirecast, a powerful multi-input switching and graphics solution for live streaming in any situation.
The MKE600 is a shotgun microphone ideal for professional video camera applications. Maximal rejection of ambient side noises thanks to pronounced directivity. And because the MKE600 has a very good suppression of structure-borne noise, it makes one of the most versatile all-round shotgun microphones on the market.
Dip your sadness in this bowl till you feel minor changes in your body.
XS Wireless Digital is the perfect wireless audio solution for content creators and filmmakers. Thanks to a 2.4 GHz transmission, XS Wireless Digital is a truly plug-and-play system that allows you to upgrade your in-camera audio with one-button operation. With a variety of configurations to choose from, this entry point into the world of wireless will improve your workflow and will expand the possibilities of how you capture audio for your video. For more information, visit sennheiser.com/xswd.
Okay, welcome to ProAV Live and our session with Johnny from Red. Hello, Johnny. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on here. Really looking forward to it.
That should be good. So thank you everyone who's joining us. If you leave comments all the way throughout this in the live chat, we can see these as we're speaking, so we can answer any questions that you may have. But essentially the idea of this stream is, so you guys did a marketing campaign which was based around the 3 pillars of Red, which I thought was a really nice way to sum up what makes Red, if you like, what are the core foundations and mentality behind the company. Do you want to explain any more on that?
Yeah, sure. So we've got this fantastic new marketing team behind us, and they basically came up with this whole idea of resolution, Redcode and reliability, the things that are kind of staples for Red and what differentiate them from our competitors. So we've built up this little slideshow presentation and kind of in a lot of the things we're going out and doing, talking about each of these pillars. So we're going to go through each of those today, hopefully chat with some of you guys, have some cool discussions. And that's what it's all about with, because we're all in isolation now, it's a fantastic opportunity to reach more people than we've ever done before, really, because I'm just one sales engineer for Europe. So my time is very limited in how much I can travel. Same with you, Carl. So
absolutely. A great way to reach out to multiple people at once, these streams. So everyone who is watching, let us know in the live chat who you are, what work do you do, what cameras do you use? Tell us a little bit about yourselves to get us started. That would be absolutely brilliant. So before we get started with that, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, Johnny? I think that's your first slide here, isn't it?
So prior to working for Red, 5-6 years ago now, I actually bought a Red Epic. So I put my money where my mouth was. I decided I wanted to try and be a videographer, cinematographer, started shooting with that. But very quickly, I found that a lot of people were hiring me in the camera because they wanted to understand raw workflows a lot more. So I kind of started as a very rudimentary kind of DIT. Then through, I guess, luck of the draw, someone said, hey, do you want to come and be a DIT trainee on this big feature film? So I said, hell yeah, this sounds amazing. So I kind of fell in love with feature films from there and decided to shift my direction and move over to working on feature films. So I kind of started as a DIT trainee, worked my way up, DIT assistant, and eventually became a fully fledged DIT working on productions like Dark Crystal, The Crown. I assisted on Transformers, and I then worked in the digital lab, so post-production on Kingsman and Holmes and Watson. So that's kind of a lot of the things that I talk about with post-production and using the cameras, because I can relate to everyone at home. I've gone there, I've owned a camera, I've had to shoot with it, and I've also worked on films as well.
It's great to approach things like this from both the angle of being an operator and being a post-production specialist is absolutely key. It's brilliant. Okay, shall we start with some slides?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's dive right in. So what we're going to be looking at today, as I said, the 3 pillars of Red. So that's going to be the power of 8K. So we're going to look at 8K, why you would want to consider 8K. Some of you may have just bought a 4K TV and gone, what's this 8K thing? What's this 8K thing I've got to invest into now? So we'll dive really into why it's beneficial today and also then going forward into the future.
Cool.
We'll then dive into the next slide. It kind of flips through them. So we'll then go into Redcode Raw. So we'll then dive into, for me personally, the 2 most exciting things to do with Red, and that's our Redcode Raw compression system and also IPP2, which is our latest image processing pipeline. And then finally, onto reliability. Why do so many productions entrust Red as being their camera of choice, and what makes them so robust and great for any multitude of different productions? So I always like to start off with Jim himself. So Jim Jannard, for those of you not familiar, he founded the company back in 2007 after selling off Oakley. So he was the founder of Oakley Sunglasses, and he took his passion for images and filmmaking and wanted to make a replacement to film, bring digital cameras forward, progress them. At the time, they were very expensive. So he brought in the Red One, which was one of the first 4K cameras at a really competitive price at the time. Lots of directors picked up on it at the time. Steven Soderbergh, Peter Jackson, Ridley Scott all started shooting with Red very early on. And you can see a few other little bits of key information there with The Hobbit. We released our 8K sensor, Guardians of the Galaxy shooting on Red, and then obviously recently Stranger Things and Mindhunter. So on to the next one. And this is where we're looking at just a small evolution of the technology, just to give those of you who are somewhat new to Red a very brief overview. So we name our cameras by their body and then the sensor inside them. So the Red One was the first body, and then the Mysterium sensor was the sensor was actually inside it. That was the 4K chip. Yep. We then moved over to the DSMC body, which is what we're very well known for, being completely modular, build it however you want, run and gun on a gimbal or full-on studio setup.
And when you mentioned earlier that you yourself bought a Red Epic, that's presumably what you were talking about, was it? DSM-1?
So DSMC1 back in 2012, I think, is when I purchased it. So a couple of years ago now. And this is where we introduced one of the things, one of our slogans, obsolescence obsolete, where somebody who purchased the Red One could upgrade into the DSMC Red Epic. The Epic sensor was 5K. And throughout Red's history, you've always been able to trade your camera in, get the latest and greatest and never go obsolete or have to go online, find someone sketchy online to sell it to. Did the money really come there? All those kind of things. So it's been a really fantastic program that some people have purchased the red one back in 2007 and upgraded throughout the entire range to the Ranger, which you see there on the right. I've seen a few people who have done that. So it's a really cool system.
That's really cool. So just before we get on to the next slide, which is about 8K, there's a couple of little comments which I want to touch on in the chat. There's a few people talking about what they shoot. We've got an F3 user here from Sony. We've got a Blackmagic G2 user, which is great. Sony FS5 user. An interesting question though from John Sweeney, who says, hey, he's based out of the US, but he's looking to move to the UK with his wife who was born here. Is there a pretty big scene here?
Huge.
Absolutely massive film industry here in the UK.
I think at the moment, pretty much every studio, well, prior to the lockdown, was filled to the brim. So our Red offices are based in Pinewood, and the car parks are absolutely rammed. There's no parking spaces, constant productions everywhere, from the really high end right down to short films, music videos, all those kind of things.
Pinewood's probably the most well-known of the studios, but it's only one of many. There's Leavesden, which is just around the corner from where I'm actually living here in Hemel Hempstead, and where ProAV is based. There's Elstree, Shepperton. There's so many film studios. And they're actually all being bought out quite a lot by streaming sites at the moment. So Netflix, Disney, all people like that. So there's a massive market for film production.
And also quite a lot of films that you probably perceive as American films actually shot over here.
Absolutely.
Obviously due to tax incentives, but, a huge amount of the Marvel productions are shot here. You know, really, really high amounts. Black Widow was shot here, all those kind of things. So lots of work
Star Wars,
here.
of course.
Yep, How did I miss that one?
Yeah, exactly. Right, okay, cool. Let's crack on then with the first point. Now, this is probably what Red is most famous for, the pushing high resolution.
So we've always been pushing resolution ever since the Red one. When the Red one came out, everyone was still on HD or even below. We came with 4K, then went 5K, 6K, now to 8K. So why do we want to go to 8K? And that's what we're going to go through in these slides. So the next two slides are the two sensors we have. So if we switch to the next one. So the first sensor we have is the Monstro. This is our large format sensor, or VistaVision. And compared to some of the competition, we've gone for a slightly wider sensor, just to touch on large format filmmaking for a moment. That's so we can get a lot of spherical coverage. There's a couple of cool charts out there. I think Phil Holland's made one of them showing the spherical coverage compared to a lot of our competition. And where they start vignetting, we still get fantastic coverage on that. Some people may say, hey, but then the other sensors are more tuned to anamorphic. Red is still perfect for anamorphic work as well. Peaky Blinders was shot Cook anamorphic. Dark Crystal, which I worked on as the DIT, we use anamorphic lenses on that as well. So it just gives you the flexibility of both worlds of lenses, basically.
And of course, you've got the resolution there. You're shooting in 8K, so if you need to crop off the sides for anamorphic, I mean, it's no big loss really in terms of resolution, is it?
Exactly. There's so many pixels to play with there. And I think going to just the next point there with the, if you go back one more slide, sorry. Touch on one more thing there, sorry. Because we've got that larger sensor, we've gone for a larger photo sight in there as well.
Yes.
So although we're talking about dynamic range and shadow detail there, we're getting a lot of those benefits of more dynamic range than our other sensors and that low light detail because of that larger photo sight. So in comparison to helium, which we'll see on in a moment, that's 3.5 microns, whereas Monster is 5. So we're getting a lot more light coming in, a much bigger pixel to fill up with light. And that's giving us that higher dynamic range, the highest of any camera on the market, and that better low light handling as well. And one thing that I always like to touch on quickly, I don't want to drag on too much on each sensor, is the ability to use S35 lenses with the Monstro.
Yeah.
So because we've got 8K, if you want to get S35mm coverage, maybe you want to use a lovely set of Cooke S2s or some Leicas because you want to use the dynamics of the Monstro sensor, drop down to 6K and you've got S35 coverage. Whereas some of our competitors, you either go below 4K, so below Netflix spec, or you go to 4K. And if you then want to crop in on that, you're going to HD. So it's pretty much a way of always staying Netflix approved and even 4K.
No matter what types of lenses you want to use.
Exactly. So it's kind of like a 2-in-1.
Mentioning the frame rates there as well. When you're in that 6K, you get up to 80 frames a second, which is great. And 60 and 8K. So
Yeah, that's the big thing. 60 FPS and 8K is super flexible. And that leads us on to the next camera, the Helium, probably the camera we're most well known for 8K, which came out, the sensor came out in 2015. So there's this whole huge backlog of 8K content that as soon as the switch on Netflix is done and we all get 8K TVs, we're going to have this huge amount of content. And I think the thing that we want to stress here is how widely used this sensor is. 8K-S35, the highest resolution sensor. We've got productions like Irishman, Politician, Lost in Space, Our Planet, Mindhunter, Money Heist. Out of the 43 most popular Netflix productions last year, 22 of those were Red, and then 13 then were Helium. So that's just kind of speaking volumes as to how widely used this sensor is, firstly for streaming and then in the market. Looking at Irishman, they selected Helium because they felt that it matched the look of the film stock really well. So that's one really great thing that we love to hear, why filmmakers are choosing Helium. Obviously, we've got a lot of the power of 8K, which we're going into in a moment, but also stills. So because we've got 35.4 megapixels, we can go on to the next slide, actually. It's a huge amount of resolution. So a lot of people go to me and they say, hey, so 8K, that's only twice as large as 4K. Well, actually, no. So 4K is 8.3 megapixels, whereas 8K is 35.4. So 4 times the resolution of 4K.
And if you think about buying a stills camera, so say we were, forget video forget Red, all the rest of it. You were just looking at buying a DSLR, and you found an 8 megapixel DSLR and then a 35 megapixel DSLR. I mean, the difference between those two would be huge. Absolutely huge. Everyone would know that. Everyone would be thing, and that is the resolution, exact same resolution difference in the video world.
No, yeah, exactly. And it's giving yourself the best possible negative to start playing with. If we go on to the next slide, so what are some of the things that we can do with this 8K? So the one that we're showing off here, the most obvious is the crop. So maybe you were getting close to this Komodo dragon. You were at the very end of your focal length, maybe a 70 to 200. You've got this beautiful shot on the left showing the 8K image, but then you want to crop in, and you can still crop in and retain 4K. You've got this 4K window you can move around and get this close up that you wouldn't have been able to get because you were limited on the lenses, and you're not going to lose quality there.
And this is a perfect example of when that cropping is really useful as well, because one, you can go wider on purpose because you don't quite know where that wild subject is going to be moving, and so you want a bit of flexibility. But also, you might have had one thing in mind when you were filming it, but then a different thing in mind when editing it, and so you wanted to go tighter for the emotional feel of the piece, which is very common in these sorts of high product value and production value, like BBC things, for example. Like
no, exactly. The natural history units absolutely love Helium because it means they can get closer to the subject while retaining that high resolution spec that they all want to work to. Especially with longer lenses as well. Some of them who are on those super long Canon 1000mm lenses, they get that little bit extra out of that lens by being able to crop in and use a bit more of that. So the next one then, speaking of those wide angle shots, we really see where 8K starts to kind of pull ahead. So the HD image, we're not really seeing too much detail. I don't know, hopefully you can see that red little square box there, just below the pillar on the right. At 4K, we're starting to see some of the detail there, but at 8K, I can tell you from my screen and obviously through experiences that we're getting a better sense of depth there as well. We can see that there's a difference between the little ridge and then the shrubs closer to us as well. So we're having as much detail there from a creative standpoint, giving you the flexibility to use the image however you want. Maybe we shot this frame, we had a car driving through it, we could then crop in and track that car driving through the road as well. So again, lots of flexibility. We then come on to the next slide, which is close-ups. So when we're creating a lot of these textures within the frames, we're trying to create, in this instance, a spherical eye. Now, if you're trying to create circular things with square pixels, how are you going to do that? We can see at HD, we're starting to get this kind of laddering effect, where the pixels are kind of trying to make these beautiful smooth edges. And 4K looks beautiful, still does very well. But at 8K, what we're actually seeing here, obviously I know we're streaming, but on the 8K crop in there, we're getting such fine detail. We can see that there's actually different levels on the little lizard's eye there. And on the next slide, we're really talking about resolution is not sharpness. It's just highly resolved. So the image on the right is we're trying to make a spherical object in, obviously very low resolution here. But then in 8K, we've got enough pixels that we can really resolve everything as our eye would see it as well. So go on to the next one there. And then, so this is also one. So going back to the lizard there, when we're looking at the lizard's eye or even just skin tone in general, it's not just one uniform color on my face. There's pinks, there's greens, there's yellows, browns, all these different kind of skin tones that are meshed into our face. And by having that many pixels, we can see the differentiation in that area. Comparing 8K to around 4K here, the amount of pixels that we can use to represent a skin tone from a creative standpoint is great. So giving you that flexibility to choose what to do with that skin tone, choose how to work with it and not be limited. And then we've got a little video actually to play here, Carl. It's the 8K side-by-side shot. So this just shows...
Actually, we didn't play the original Power of Red one, did we? But yeah, let's start with this one, shall we? So, okay.
The two people in the car. So then in that shot specifically, what we're looking at is, hey, not every production has the ability to have multiple cameras. So let's say you were shooting that scene. It was, the light was going and you needed to get the shot. So you can use one camera and get multiple frames within that while retaining your 4K delivery spec. Most productions I'm speaking to people now, they're always uploading to 4K. Everyone's always uploading 4K to YouTube, to Vimeo. Netflix is obviously 4K mandated. And the ability to get both of those shots while retaining that same performance. So you can get the shot and crop in for those, whereas usually you'd have to then change the lens, crop in, and then you would get a different performance. So from a creative standpoint as a director, it's also giving you a lot of benefit there to get multiple shots out of one. I think that's really the biggest benefit of using 8K in any kind of production. And the next slide that we go on to is downsampling or super sampling. So some of you may be going, hey, I love 8K and I love the frame, but I don't want anyone cropping in on it. I want to use as much of the resolution as possible. And downsampling is a way to get more out of the image. So it's a process of, through some very clever algorithms, taking those 35 million pixels and taking them down into a 4K window. And as a result, we get improved clarity, detail, textures, and also our noise floor changes. So if you think for a moment, we've got a pixel of noise this size. By shrinking it down by 4 times, our noise profile changes, and you could hide a lot of that noise that if you're shooting in a really, really low light scene, or there's some very dark points in the image. And looking at the comparison here between 2K, so for this instance, we've upscaled 2K to 4K. That's not a very reasonable kind of thing to do, but just showing you, hey, this is what happens if you try to upscale your footage. We've then got a native 4K, and we can start to see some detail, but still then, even the skin tone is slightly uniform, and we're not seeing detail in the eyebrows. But at 8K, the amount of clarity that we're getting in the eyebrows, we can start to pick out individual hairs in the actress there, and we're really seeing the deep reds, and we're seeing all the differences and sometimes imperfections in her skin, which then from a creative standpoint, if some SFX artist has done some beautiful makeup or some prosthetics, you want to see all of that. So that's what 8K is kind of giving you, a better 4K image today while future-proofing you for tomorrow. So the next one's the downsampling video, which I think we can look at quickly. So in that video there, we're actually seeing what we're talking about with this downsampling. And very Timo, yeah, I know it's quite a weird concept to think of how downsampling. So it's taking those 35 million pixels, we've got them, and we have to reinterpret that information to get it down to 4K. And that's what downsampling or super sampling is. And we saw in those side-by-sides there that the 8K image, even though they're exposed the exact same as the 4K image, had a much cleaner noise profile because we've downsampled it to that 4K. There's some really good examples on our website, and we've got a new solitary series coming out soon that we're going to show a lot of that really in depth. So it is honestly one of those things that in the industry, when we've started using it, I've seen the benefits of it. It is really, really cool. And then the final point there on the next slide is then the ability to redeliver. So when we think about film, we look back and we see Jurassic Park shot at the time. They scanned it at the highest quality they could and delivered it to VHS. They rescanned it again when DVD came out. They delivered to DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K Blu-ray. And that's a similar thought process to how you can think of 8K. So a lot of people have been shooting 8K since 2015. So when the helium sensor came out. And when Netflix do that 8K switch and 8K TVs are more prevalent in the market, which this year they will be, we've seen Samsung and LG releasing 3 or 4 new 8K TVs, that all your content will be able to go, whoop, you can redeliver it, re-export it with your new 8K timeline and make more money off it again, as opposed to either upscaling or not being able to redeliver it to these 8K platforms. So that's one of the really big parts, especially now, because it's going to be just around the corner.
Absolutely. And I think this is why things like streaming sites like Netflix are insisting that their productions are shot with high resolutions, 4K or above, is so that they get this redeliver and future proofing. Okay, let's move on to I class this as definitely the biggest advantage of Red. I mean, using a variety of different cameras myself, this is the thing that brings me back to Red for raw capture every single time. I mean, you just do raw very well.
So straight into this slide is what is Redcode Raw, and Redcode Raw is what allowed us to shoot 4K back in 2007, and it's what is enabling us to shoot 8K today. So if you go on to the next slide, we've got a couple of key points here. So Redcode Raw maximizes the image fidelity for use in post-production. So some of the really key points, as I'm sure many of you will be familiar with RAW in general anyway, from raw photography, but not all RAW is created equal. There are some different flavors of RAW. And one thing that we had to talk about is how raw is your RAW. And Redcode Raw retains every bit of information since when the light hits the sensor. And in a few slides, I'll really break that down. But it enables you to retain valuable metadata about each shot. And one in specific is the ISO. So you can see here that we've got ISO is not baked in. So after the fact, you can actually change your ISO as if you were on set, because how it's kind of working in comparison to other manufacturers is light is coming in, hitting the sensor, they're doing some processing, ISO, color balance, and your color space, then saving that data. So it's effectively baking those bits in. Whereas the red light comes in, hits the sensor, we save that data, and everything else happens after the fact. And we'll really show that in a few slides' time. But just to quickly run through this one, it also enables you to craft a unique look for your shots because you're not throwing away any data. You can really come in there and extract the look that makes it unique to you. And in some of the tests that I've done with a lot of DPs, even before I joined Red, on set, it's a very close battle between a lot of our other competitors in the industry. But when we get into post, and when those DPs get into post and with their colorists, and they see the power of retaining all of that valuable metadata, that's what really makes it very special. One cool thing is that we've made a lot of improvements, so you can play it back on a laptop, these 8K RAW files, and also lens information. So VFX is getting more and more common. People are integrating it a lot more, so you want as much information about the scene as possible. So you can record frame by frame the position of the lens's focus and iris. So that's great for VFX guys.
For me, it's the scaling compression is partly why I love working with Redcode so much, is the ability to be filming right up at a high compression ratio one day and then right down on a low one the next day. You can scale it depending on whether you're shooting those Netflix shows or whether you're just doing a simple interview for even on that same Netflix show, you can scale the raw compression whether you're doing the actual show or a behind the scenes interview with a cast member.
Yeah, completely flexible. So I guess one thing I didn't actually say there is that it's a compressed raw, and that's going to confuse a lot of people because usually compression and raw don't really go very well together, and we'll really see that in a couple of slides time. But in the next 2 slides, I'm really showing what I mean by the ability to change the ISO. So I think the next one, it was playing a little video there. Oh yeah, just skip past that. There we go. So on this one, so the image on the left is as shot. So you can see this image is quite bright. It was exposed to ISO 800. And there's a number of reasons why it might be this bright. It could be a once in a lifetime shot. You've got to spin around. Maybe the sun came out from behind a cloud or those kind of things. And you get this very bright shot. Or maybe you didn't have the ability to come in and change the ISO quickly. But knowing that you're shooting Redcode Raw and knowing that the ISO is not baked in, provided you're not clipping, we can bring that ISO down. So you've gone from ISO 800 to ISO 250 with an adjustment in DaVinci Resolve. I've just seen a comment. Does the color shift when going through ISO? Ultimately, no. As you can kind of see here, obviously, as a result of bringing the ISO down, contrast has changed and the perception of color has changed. But ultimately, it's just the amplification of the signal. So ISO's pretty crazy in kind of what it allows us to do in changing the image. But ultimately, it won't actually shift. Like it won't go from a blue to a red kind of thing by changing the ISO. It's all in metadata. You can change it at any point. So now going on to the next slide, we're looking at some of the more in-depth features that we can change with the RAW. So obviously we've got this amazing image on the left, exposed to ISO 800, white balance 3.2, tint, and also our highlight roll-off. So this is something we're going to see again, because we're saving all of those ones and zeros, we can choose how they're being interpreted after the fact. So we've come into post, we've gone, you know what? From a creative standpoint, I'm going to boost it. I want to get from ISO 800 to 1000. I want to see a bit more detail, get a bit more information into my scene. We're going to shift the white balance. Obviously, most RAW formats, you can shift your white balance, do a bit of a tint shift, and we're going to soften off the highlights a little bit more. So we can either go from a very soft filmic roll-off and dial it back or to however we want to create this unique image. Again, creating that unique image that DPs love, that we love, and all those kind of things to really separate it from everyone else.
It gives you the control, craft the look you want.
Exactly, and
you're stuck with.
And I think that's the thing for me that really sets it apart. Every time, you know, with every red job, when you look at them, you see something different. You know, with a lot of cameras that have amazing looks, some of them tend to look quite similar, and that's perfectly fine. You know, I think there's no perfect camera. It's choosing the camera that works well for you. I think that the pitch that I'm kind of giving to you here is why not try and create your own unique look for each job.
Absolutely.
And the next bit that is a big part of that is it being a 16-bit container. So again, how raw is your RAW? Most other RAW containers are 12-bit or 10-bit. So looking at 16-bit here, 16-bit RAW container, looking at that compared to 8-bit, we've got a lot of banding. We can see that in the color breakdown below that as well, that by having that 16-bit container, we can present the scene as accurately to you as possible and give you the most flexibility in post as well. And then on the next slide, we're then just simply looking at how that compares to 10-bit and 12-bit. So 16-bit, we've got 65,000 tones per channel. 12-bit is 4,095 and 10-bit is 1,000. So why restrict yourself to limiting the amount of colors you can capture when you can have 65,000 tones per channel and really see all those skin tone shifts, those beautiful sunsets, all those kind of things, and draw it out in post? If someone is asking me, what is the red look? The red look is a very neutral look. We give you how your eye sees it. And if you want a cinematic look, firstly choose a cinematic lens that gives you that look. And then in the grade, you can use and shift through LUTs and primaries and secondaries to really hone in on that look.
Absolutely.
So I think the next thing, is there any questions at the moment? Or
yeah, should we answer some questions?
Yeah, let's see where we are here before we dive into IPP2.
So obviously they're about 30 seconds behind us, so we won't get anything soon. What about kind of actual comparative data rates for high resolution RAW we're getting from Red Raw as compared to other systems? Do I need terabytes of cards to shoot a few minutes in 8K? And this is a huge, I don't want to say misconception, because 8K is massive. People hear 8K and go, I can't deal with that. I can't deal with 4K. And that is entirely valid to think like that. But this is why that compression, that variable compression in Redcode is so critically important.
And in a few slides' time, we've actually got some of those comparisons between some of the most popular camera systems. So we're going to get quite aggressive in some of those slides and showing the comparisons. I'm going to give some real-world examples as well from shoots that I've done as well with Red and how that would have compared on other camera systems.
Yep.
But I think to illustrate the how the RAW system is working, we'll just dive into IPP2 a little bit. So IPP2 is our latest image processing pipeline. And it's been completely rebuilt from the ground up. So we've got better management of challenging colors, more accurate midtones, the ability to control how your highlights are being handled and the contrast within the image. And it's also a much more intuitive workflow built from the ground up with HDR in mind and industry standard naming. If we could switch back to the slides there, Carl, that would be awesome.
There we go.
So if we skip 2 slides on to the one with all the red squares.
Yes.
So this is the one where I'm really going to start breaking down how Redcode Raw is so unique. So the R3D raw image we see on the left there, that is at the point we're saving that data. That's when it is all those ones and zeros are on your card, and where we start to differentiate ourselves from a lot of other raw manufacturers. So things like the demosaic happen. We get the highlight extension. And what's really cool to talk about this is the IPP2 came out a few years ago, and the helium sensor was already out by that point. So people who owned a helium got this IPP2 upgrade, and instantly that they got a better demosaic algorithm. So they got a slightly sharper image as a result. And they also got slightly better dynamic range with it being able to see more into the highlights. And what's super cool is that wasn't just for helium owners. Even Red 1 owners have been benefiting from this new IPP2 because they're all built on the same fundamental principle of recording that raw data as soon as it hits the sensor. So things like the demosaic, the ISO, the color space, so our new red, white, gamma RGB aren't burnt into the image. So they've been able to get the benefits of this better color science, the better log curve, completely after the fact a few years down the line, which is super cool. We then come on to the next 2 lines where the creative aspect happens. So your LUT and your CDL gets applied. We've then got the output tone map. So the contrast within the image and how that's being handled. Our color space and output gamma space are then applied. So your 709 and your BT1886. So you can do that instantly, completely after the fact as well. So nothing's being burnt in there. This is all happening completely after the fact to get the image output to your screen. I think this is the thing that just separates us. You know, all of these bits, as we make improvements, I saw somebody asking about, is there going to be any Redcode Raw enhancements? We've been doing that. IPP2 is a component of Redcode. We've been improving the color science, improving how efficient it is and how easy it is to work with. So just we can breeze through the next 2 slides in just showing how wide red, white, gamma RGB is and how easy it is to convert into other slides, into other color spaces, sorry. We've got 709, Rec 2020, and then red, white, gamma is absolutely huge. Don't ask me how it's seeing more than the human eye can see. There's some very clever scientists and people at Red that could probably dive into that a little bit more than me, but it just means that you capture as much as possible of the visible light spectrum. We'll skip past this one. And then this is what I'm talking about, the improvements. So legacy on the left, we can see then the updated one on the right. And we can see how challenging neon colors, so that red neon light was coming off as quite orange, whereas actually in retrospect with IPP2, we could take that same shot, reinterpret those ones and zeros, and get this beautiful deep red that's coming off the neon light. And we've got a couple of examples next. So Carl, if you want to play the first IPP2 video, we'll see a bit of a swipe.
So this is going to go quick, guys. Pay attention to this because each one of these videos is only 4 seconds long. So we can play them twice if people want. Okay, so the first one. Okay, so you can see on the car bumpers then, particularly the highlights at the back the little fluorescent lights. I'll play it again so that people can try and see it the second time round. But really pay attention to the clipped color information in the headlights and the rear bumpers of these bumper cars.
And then, yeah. Working on.
Sorry, Johnny. Say that again. They
Oh, sorry.
To hear you
No worries. Sorry. Yeah. So I was just saying again, just an example of how we're constantly improving the IPP2 codec and what our color science team is doing behind the scenes. We've got 2 more short videos that I think we just play them one after the other. That would be awesome. It just shows those benefits, and we can.
So again, really we've got a headlamp, and then we've got the a wide shot at a concert. On the headlamp, just really pay attention to the edge areas around the clipped highlight. And on the wide of the concert, it's the theatrical lights at the back, the colours, the pinks, the blues. So let's play the first one. Okay, and then the second one.
So we can see firstly there with the chromatic aberrations that are happening on the very edge of that bulb and then through the lens, that we're actually able to reduce a lot of that kind of aberration, that very, very deep purple, and get it much more pleasing and realistic to how the eye would have seen it. So again, we're looking at the improvements that can be made and learning. We're always learning and trying to make things better through free firmware upgrades. The second one, again, was a concert, a rave with some very bright LED lights that were coming off quite weird. We've then come in, learned from it, and developed a new color technology to make it look as good as possible, basically. Always learning, always improving.
And fundamentally, that's not baked in. You know, you can go back to every single clip that you've ever shot and update it into that. Because if you shot it in this raw codec, you can shoot that scene and then choose which one you wanted, depending on whether or not you see any issues like that after the fact. If you want to, it gives you back all that control.
And the next slide, I think it's a 2-shot of me and you there, Carl.
Oh, yes, indeed.
So the next slide is just showing that improvement. So you've got Dragon Color, which is kind of what the previous generation was called. And then we see IPP2, where Dragon Color didn't have very many reds in terms of saturation, and Dragon Color was very heavy in the blue. IPP2 now is much more consistent across the entire spectrum. So again, just more benefits there. And one of the things that I'm showing here with IPP2 is I was talking about the output tone map and the highlight roll-off. So because we've got all those raw ones and zeros, we could start to dial in that unique look. So some use cases for this. So if we dive onto the next slide, say we're shooting a noir film. We want a really high contrast image and a really hard highlight roll-off. It's very akin to noir films. But then maybe the next job, you're doing a beauty commercial, and you want a really soft filmic roll-off, really low contrast. We can do that in camera and in post-production and change it however we want. So on the image on the left, on camera and on set, we can see this. We've got a high contrast and hard highlight roll-off. But then maybe we get into post, we're thinking, oh, actually, I'm kind of thinking this scene is a bit more dreamlike, and we want to have a really soft highlight roll-off. We're changing how those ones and zeros towards the highlights are being handled, and changing the contrast within the image before we start working with any LUTs or anything. It's just a great viewing technology to work with on set and in post. I think if we go on to the next slide, this is the one that starts to get very exciting for me as a DIT. So if we move straight onto the next slide, this is where I get a lot of questions is, why can't I just shoot uncompressed 8K? I could shoot 4K uncompressed, and I love it on other cameras. But in reality, uncompressed 8K would be 5,000 megabytes a second. A single frame would be 200 megabytes, and you'd fill up one of our 500 gig cards in about 1 minute and 30 seconds. I don't think there's too many people and directors that would be too happy of, sorry, you've only got 1.5 minutes to get this take, not going to work. But the compression system that we use, that we will explain kind of how it works a little bit, is we can tune it. So 5:1 compression is the least amount of compression you can get in a Monster or Helium, because that's the point that we felt that there was no noticeable difference between 5:1 and then uncompressed. And that means that we then end up getting 32 minutes on a 500 gig card. And if we dial the compression in even a little bit more to 51 minutes, so and this is all visually lossless.
with no difference in visual quality between one and the other, we've gone from 1 minute 34 seconds on a card to 32 minutes, which is pretty incredible.
And it really is amazing. So the actual image fidelity doesn't change, but there are some subtle things that I will point out when we get to a later slide. But if we now move on to the next one, this is where we start getting competitive. And I saw some of the questions, how does that compare to the competition? So as you can see at the top there, so we've got the Dragon X, so that's 6K S35 at 122 megabytes a second. Let's move up to some of the 8K ones. So we've got 8K full format, 6:1 compression. So this is Netflix spec. So on Dark Crystal, we shot 6:1. That's the least amount of compression that they will allow you to go. They feel 5:1's a little bit overkill. So that's Netflix spec. And then we start looking at some of these other guys. So Alexa LF right down there at the bottom, 501 megabytes a second. For 4 times less resolution, you've got to pay double on storage. We've got the Venice there, both of their codecs, very good, XOC NXT and ST, around 300 megs, and then at 6K, 225. So still 40% less resolution than 8K. And we then also see, just one more to bring up there, Ari's new codec, Codex HDE, is still quite heavy at 300 megabytes a second. So you can be shooting more resolution and saving money at the same time, which is quite a weird kind of concept to get around. More for less. It really is pretty crazy. So again, shooting a 3-minute scene at 4.5K on the LF is about a gigabyte per second. That's 90 gig in 3 minutes. Whereas at 8:1 on 8K, 29 gigs. And on the next slide, we'll see what that means over the course of production. So this was a streaming series I worked on before I joined Red. We shot around 1,300 hours, but I rounded it down to 1,000 just to make some of the numbers quite easy to look at. Total storage of 8K full frame at 6:1, Netflix approved spec, 764 terabytes over the course of that job. If we had done that on the 65, that'd have been 2.6 petabytes. Insane. If we had done that on Ari's new codec, the HDE, that one that's slightly less, but even then most people would have done it at Ari Raw, that's almost 1.1 petabytes. And then on the Venice in ST, just about 1 petabyte. So we're saving thousands of dollars there over the course of production, and we're getting a lot more longevity out of our 8K file.
And also this is Ari and Sony. I mean, if anyone knows codecs Sony do, XOCN is a fantastic codec.
Yeah, it is.
And that is 6K with their standard size one. So that is their compressed raw codec that they brought out for the pure purpose of reducing file sizes. And it's giving you that much difference. It's incredible.
And now we'll go on to the next slide, which is where I'm going to talk about it. Because obviously everyone's kind of thinking, how is that possible? How are you getting more resolution for less storage? And this is what we have is our patented wavelet compression system that is Redcode Raw. Now I'm going to try and break it down. There's much more intelligent people at Red that design this that could probably get into the maths and will melt my brain. This is the way that I really like. This is the way that I really like looking at it. So you can see on the very top image there, we've got these red bars, and you can kind of think of those as data points. So we've got a signal coming through a camera, and this red bar here is saying, "Hey, I'm a car. I'm a red car." The next one's saying, "Hey, I'm a blue pixel. I'm a green pixel. I'm this." And as you can see, so as we start to add more of those data points, we can start to create this wave, and you can see that actually the difference between that middle wave and the very bottom wave, there's no change in that wave. And what the compression system is doing is it's looking at that wave that makes the image that we're viewing now on the screen, and taking away the data points that it thinks it can do to still rebuild the same image. So for example, the very bottom one may be 2:1 compression at 8K, and the middle one might be 5:1. Now, where are some of the things that you might see some of these differences? Because there are differences. I'm not going to come on here and say that there's no downsides to it. Some of the things where you will see this are in very dark, or maybe when you start to get into slightly noisy areas. With more compression, you may see a slight increase in the texture of the grain. But then sorry, go ahead.
It's a problem with anything that is fine detail, isn't it? So that's where you will see any sort of compression is fine detail, and noise by definition is a series of very, very, very fine quite randomly generated and moving bits of texture.
Because for the wave that I've done there would be a very basic image. Typically the image would be going absolutely nuts like this. So obviously when you have very high frequency areas, like in very dense foliage, kind of things like that, you may see on the very edges a very slight softening, but the actual quality and detail of the image isn't deteriorating like you may see with a JPEG online. We've all seen those JPEGs that have been compressed and compressed and compressed, and they're just a blocky mess. With Redcode, you don't get that blocky artifacting because we're using wavelet compression.
Yep.
Now, it'd be very tricky to show some of those examples here live and then through compression, but we're working to bring out some really great side-by-side examples of 5, 10, and 20 to 1 compression, the extremes across the whole spectrum. So
you
coming very soon.
Download very high resolution video files for that. There's no way we could show anything like that over a stream.
so very soon on red.com/downloads, we'll have hopefully some of those comparisons to really show that, because it's only really great when you can see it with your own eyes and not have a sales rep telling you how amazing it is.
Absolutely. And it's also worth pointing out that on that downloads page, you've got a bunch of other just normal red footage, which is shot at a variety of different situations and in different compression ratios. And so there's some of that, I believe, is shot on quite high compression ratios anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, there's some 13 to 1 in there as well. And one thing that Jeffrey just said that very, very true is that if you've ever gone to the cinema and seen a DCP, that is wavelet compression. So if you think cinema quality projection is good, then it's the same technology that is somewhat being used. Obviously, there's some nuances to it, and we've made a lot of changes to it. But fundamentally, the compression system is working in a similar fashion.
Cool.
So on to the next slide. This is just some examples. Now, again, obviously, we're streaming. We can't necessarily see the differences here. But this is where I talk about where you would use different compressions. So let's say you're doing a very high-end Marvel job. Let's say that you've got the gig as the DP to come do some huge job. A lot of heavy green screen, and you want all those fine details to be able to key out the green and the blue very, very well. 5 to 1 is probably what you're going to go towards. But if you're doing a documentary, it's going to YouTube, or maybe you're doing a sit-down interview and you need some more duration on your card, you can increase the compression, because your deliverable, no one's going to know the difference. If you're posting something to an Instagram story or doing something for TV where there is a lot of compression that gets added onto it anyway, a lot of that people won't even be able to tell the difference, and you can save money on the storage. So a lot of people ask me, which one should I be using? The sweet spot is between 5 and 10 to 1. So most people will tend to skirt around between those ones. I haven't really seen many people go to 20 to 1. That's a bit on the extreme side. As I said earlier, web TV, so Netflix, I've always gone to 6 to 1. Then if we're doing YouTube, those kind of things.
I think Netflix do let people go to 8 to 1 though, right?
Yeah. So somewhere between 6 and 8 to 1, depending on the camera. On their website, there's a really good breakdown for each camera of what they'll allow you to go to. But obviously it's important to always do your own testing. See how you feel it works and what compression ratios you think you can work with. But most people between 5 and 10 to 1, they think there's very, very minimal difference in there.
Absolutely. I mean, I know when we've used Reds for some B-roll on the YouTube channel, we normally at 12 to 1. We haven't found that there's even on going straight to YouTube, and YouTube is the only platform, even streaming that in 4K, I've seen no difference at all. And it makes the file size much smaller.
A question from Wool Flannel there asking about getting some high frame rate footage. I will speak to the guys. I'll see what we can do. Mm-hmm. And then the final bit here that we're going to look at is the reliability. So Red cameras are used in a whole multitude of areas. They're used from scientific research. So NASA use them. We've got a load of cameras up in the International Space Station. Mm-hmm. And if anybody tuned into one of the Red live streams recently, we actually looked at some of that footage that NASA sent us. So it's being used up for science and research. Even farmers, believe it or not, some farmers use Red cameras. So one instance I was told was fish farmers. They will fly their drones over the fish and be able to tell when they're pregnant or ready for whatever fish farmers do with fish, depending on how their color shifts. So it is pretty crazy, the spectrum of which these high resolution cameras are being used for, from science to the creative film area. So some of the things we're going to look at now in terms of reliability, what are the situations people are putting their Red cameras into and they're thriving because they are built well, they've got a really hard magnesium body, they can take a knock, and how you can depend on them. So the first slide that I've got here is hot shots. So Gabriel Mann, awesome guy, got a really, really cool Instagram, and he hikes, as he said, hikes hard and fast is how he puts it, and shoots with a crew called Hot Shots. They're a specialized team of people that go into the wildfires in California, and they're basically this first line of defense to try and handle it.
Quite a job.
And we've got a short little video that's about 1.5 minutes long here, where it's a bit of a testimonial from him to show the really tough situations that he's putting that camera through, that funnily enough, every other camera he's tested couldn't hack it. So if you want to play that short little video now, Carl, that'd be awesome.
Filming wildfires is like this nightmare cocktail of everything you don't want anywhere near a camera. It's like a war zone. You got helicopters, flare guns, bombs, jets, fire tornadoes, chainsaws, cable news douchebags with untied boots. I've been baptized so many times by the ships that nothing electronic anywhere near me should work ever again. But the Reds just keep cranking. And I don't use a camera cover, because I'm an idiot, but it's a rad paint job. Every single camera I've used on the fire line has gone down from the heat, except the Reds. So when some bro asks me, like, hey, would you trust a Red for a big client job? Dude, you're in an air-conditioned studio for 8 hours. I've taken my Reds to the gates of hell. Relax. Things are tanks.
Always love that little bit there at the end. It's crazy, just like the heat that those guys are going through, and then placing an 8K camera in there as well. It's crazy, and he's just been plowing them through there. He throws those cameras around and gets some amazing shots, which you can kind of see in some of those stills there. So, he's entrusting that camera to get him the shot that he needs there. This is how well they're built. They've got a great cooling system to get hot air away from the body as quickly as possible. And, in that situation, that camera is getting hot. It's in a hot scenario. There's 35 million pixels per frame being thrust through that sensor and through into that mini mag. So that machine is getting hot, and it's still working very well. But then I'm going to flip on to the next slide, which is then the complete opposite of that. So from hot shots, we're going to cold shots. So we're going to minus 40 degrees with Marcel Melanson. I'm sorry. Yeah, Melanson. I'm sorry if I'm saying it that wrong. But he's trekking through incredibly cold situations, tracking these guys going through there. He was doing a 300-mile trip across the ice roads and filming these guys. And, a complete contrast from hot to cold, and these cameras thriving in those situations and getting some awesome stuff. One project I haven't put in here that's another great example of that is Deadliest Catch. So Deadliest Catch has used a combination of Gemini and helium. They're getting thrown around. They're getting water thrown all over them. Although they're not waterproof, they're rugged enough that they can take a bit of a beating from these extreme conditions, and they've been thriving in them as well. And if you go on to the final slide here, Holly shots. So got hot shots, cold shots, and Holly shots. Some of the biggest productions in the world have been utilizing these cameras to capture the images that have got millions and millions of dollars behind them. I'm going to read off some of them: Mindhunter, The New Pope, Irishman, Stranger Things. We've got The Witcher, The Morning Show from Apple TV, Hidden Life, Kingdom is absolutely amazing, South Korean show. We've then got Guns Akimbo, Better Call Saul, and the list just keeps going on and on. There's a huge library shot on Red on our website, just with this wealth of productions that are using these cameras, and they're working perfectly. I worked on Dark Crystal. We shot for 11 months with those cameras. The only issues we had were because of things that we were doing wrong. So the cameras were robust. We had dust going through them. They were getting crazy hot because we were in really tight sets. They had plastic bags over them to stop debris getting stuck in them. Those cameras were hot, and they plowed on through the entire job. We didn't have to send any cameras away. No mags had to get sent away. 11 months worked absolutely perfectly. And that's probably the best testimonial I can give. I've been there, I've done Transformers, which is shot on Red, lots of other Red productions, over in Wales, in really extreme conditions all around the world. And also being an owner
Extreme
myself.
conditions like Wales.
Wales is crazy. Those sheep there are absolutely nuts. So, but also just being an owner, and obviously I know I'm coming from a inherently biased viewpoint now, being an employee of Red, but I genuinely had no issues when I owned my Epic and I upgraded it to a Dragon. Now there's a lot of stuff online, but the few that have issues were very vocal, and we like that. We want to see and work with the people to resolve their issues, which we have. And yeah, these cameras are bulletproof to a certain extent.
So should we finish by playing the Power of Red video, which we didn't play right at the beginning?
Yeah, sure.
Because that summarizes everything a little bit nicely. And then we'll, if you leave any comments and questions in the live chat while the video is playing, we will see if we can answer any of them to finish up at the end. So let's go to the video.
So quite a cool little summary video that just goes over a load of the points that we're looking at there. And yeah, very good point, very Timo. Yeah, a lot of productions are on Alexa, and we're eating into that every day. Morning Show, one of the most expensive TV shows ever produced by Apple TV, entrusted with a Red sensor. Irishman, huge production, Martin Scorsese, shot with film and then used helium to supplement that for all the VFX things. It's always toe to toe. It's always backwards and forwards. Ari get an amazing job. We get an amazing job. Sony come in. And that's what makes it fun. There's so many different tools for the job. There's not one paintbrush that suits every single job. And that's what we bring to the table, is something a bit different, high resolution, red code, and the red look that allows you to craft that look. And it's fun. That's what this whole thing is for. It's about fun and being creative with these cameras and using these tools. Exactly.
Giving you as much tools as possible and different paintbrushes to create different pieces of work. Got some interesting, lots of comments on reliability in rental situations. And I just say, as somebody who deals with a lot of different camera companies, believe me, every single camera company has problems and failures in things. That just because some people's ones have gone down does not mean that wouldn't have happened with Canon, Sony, Arri, Blackmagic, any of the others. And also remember with rentals, particularly because of the high price of Red cameras, a lot of the time with productions renting them from rental companies, bigger productions will rent fairly new ones from the rental companies because they've got a relationship with the rental companies, whereas smaller productions will rent the ones which have been around a little bit longer. And so they tend to be either previous generation models. A lot of what we're talking about here is the latest generation of Reds. Red have been not around as long as a lot of the other camera companies, but they've been around for a decent amount of time. And so they've got better,
Yeah, it's one of those things where some of our competition have been around for 100 years. We've been around since 2007. And if you look at where the Red 1 was and where we've progressed to DSMC2 and the Ranger just behind me, the amount of progression that has gone on there from image quality, reliability, and, just usability has been amazing, even from someone who, before I joined Red, seeing the constant innovation in that space, which is amazing.
Even simply between DSMC1 and DSMC2, I still think a lot of people do get confused a little bit as to which camera is which, and a lot of people rate DSMC2 on DSMC1, their experiences with DSMC1. I've seen that a lot, and they have changed so dramatically. I mean, literally everything about those cameras changed from DSMC1 to DiskMC2, even if they look relatively similar.
I mean, again, it's got some resolution discussion in there. Again, yeah, I mean, of course, I'm going to say to people, because I work for Red, that resolution is the way to go forward. And that's what we feel is the way to go forward. You know, there's a lot of use cases where DPs have chosen Red specifically because of 8K. You know, we've got a lot of natural history filmmakers that go for that resolution. And again, completely subjective. You know, this is the really exciting part about the current space. And it's a completely valid point that you bring up, you know. How why do I need so much resolution now? And you know, it's we could battle on for ages about it, but you know, well, that's the way that we've decided to go with that.
I don't work for Red. I don't need to say. I would say that the on the list of those things which we've talked about, resolution is one of my ones near the bottom. I would rate Redcode and things like that way higher in terms of a reason to purchase a Red. I would say, though, that I do rate resolution very highly for downsampling. So if I'm producing or recommending people are producing content for 1080p, I recommend they shoot in 4K and then downsample to 1080p to get the best results. Hide the noise floor, more color information, all of that goodness that we discussed about downsampling. If you are delivering in 4K, then to get the same results, you need to downsample from something higher than that. And to get the same maths from 1080p to 4K, you need 4K to 8K, because that is 4 times the information, just the same as 4K is to 1080p. Doesn't mean that you can't get great results downsampling from 6K. Of course you can, just as you could get great results from downsampling from 2.5K down to 1080p. But downsampling is a huge reason for the higher resolutions, and gets around some of the disadvantages of high resolutions, like smaller pixels, so therefore less noise capturing, less light capturing because of that, because downsampling hides a noise floor. So there's lots of things going on there with high resolutions. But I think people, when they're talking about Red, do spend a bit too much time talking about high resolutions, because things like Redcode Raw is such a better example of the power of a Red camera, in my opinion, than the difference between one resolution and another resolution, whether that's 1080p to 4K or 4K to 8K. Okay, any other little things? How does the Red TI mount work, and how do you provide global shutter in a mount? I don't know. I don't think that's even actually a current product anymore, is it, Johnny?
No, yeah. So it's a discontinued product now. Obviously, it did bring a lot of exciting features in terms of being able to get that global shutter kind of thing. I'm not 100% sure on the inner workings of how it achieved it. I might have to look into that a little bit for you there. Obviously, I know the outcome of what the mount enabled you to do with NDs and that kind of global shutter effect. I think online there are some slightly older videos from when it was released of how it does work. So I might try and dig some of those up, see if I can find those.
Gotcha. Well, if any of you have any more questions at all about Red cameras, please, these videos are all going to be available to watch watch after the fact once we've finished streaming. So this will just be up there as a normal YouTube video for you to watch. So leave any comments down below that, anything else that you may have, and we'll get back to you. But for now, I think that's a great time to wrap up. Thank you so much for running us through that, Johnny. That's brilliant.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone who joined. Lots of really cool questions, and it's what it's all about. So thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week for more ProAV Live stuff.
Thanks.
MKE600 is a shotgun microphone ideal for professional video camera applications. Maximal rejection of ambient side noises thanks to pronounced directivity. And because the MKE600 has a very good suppression of structure-borne noise, it makes one of the most versatile all-round shotgun microphones on the market.
Dip your sadness in this bowl till you feel minor changes in your body.
XS Wireless Digital is the perfect wireless audio solution for content creators and filmmakers. Thanks to a 2.4 GHz transmission, XS Wireless Digital is a truly plug-and-play system that allows you to upgrade your in-camera audio with one-button operation. With a variety of configurations to choose from, this entry point into the world of wireless will improve your workflow and will expand the possibilities of how you capture audio for your video. For more information, visit sennheiser.com/xswd.